Okay, today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Yud. A few words before we start. Today's daf is sponsored by Rebecca Schwartzmer in memory of Toby Schwartzmer, Toby Gittel Bat Moshe Tzvi Hirsch, Zichrona Lebracha. Her love of Torah was evident in the way she lived her life, her career as an educator, her welcoming kiruv, and loving compassion. I was a granddaughter not just by marriage, but in her heart. And by Ani and Andy Schiffmiller in memory of Andy's father, Tzvi ben Moshe Ze'ev and Frida Zichrono Lebracha, who passed away a few weeks ago. We're going to start. Before we start, I just want to give a few words of encouragement, okay? We're up to the 10th page of Eruvin. I know it's new. It's a little bit strange. It's not concepts you're used to. Bear with it. The concepts will get easier. They'll repeat as time goes on. Don't give up, okay? Sometimes there'll be masechtot you're more identified with or you're less identified with. This is the way Daf Yomi works. It's entering into a world of concepts that you don't understand, words that you don't understand, but it's well worth it because over time these words will become more relevant to you, more understandable to you, and it takes time and it's not simple. And I'm on my second round and it's still, I remember these concepts from before, but it's still going over them again and trying to remember what they are and how they work. But it's well worth it, and stick with it. Don't get discouraged. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes there might be dapim that are harder, dapim that are easier, but this will get easier as time goes on because the concepts that are so foreign in the beginning will become more relevant. And as I said, I strongly recommend, if you're not yet using a picture book, get yourself a picture book. There's a lot of online versions. If you want the recommended one that I've been using, the Me'ora Mevu'ar, you can find it on the portal at Daf Yomi. If you can't find it there, contact me. I will tell you how to get it. I will send you a link. A lot of people have already asked me. I've been sending the link out to lots of people. So please, get a picture book is definitely, pictures worth 1,000 words. It's really will help you with your learning. Okay, with that, we'll get started. And today's sheet also will help you. Okay, the sheets I have, even if I know my sheets aren't in English and there's been requests to have them in English. It's a little too much work at this point to do for me, but use the sheets, even if they're in Hebrew, they'll help you figure out. You'll get used to, just like some of the words are foreign to you, you'll get used to, okay, koshi is difficulty. Terutz is an answer. You'll get used to, it'll help you follow the structure. The sheets are organized also in a way that it's indented when this relates to that and that relates to that. So it'll help you kind of follow the flow of where we're going. Okay, and I'll try as best as I can during class also to always remind you of what we're up to. So as I said, I'll remind you. So let's start with where we were up to. We saw a statement about 10 lines from the bottom of Ted and Mubet yesterday. Rabba bar Rav Huna said, we're on this whole topic of nir emi bachutz v'shavemi bifnim. Right? Generally, we assume that in order for something to count as a lechi or a korah, we talked about there's a machloket, is it machitza or is it mishum heker? For sure, if it's mishum heker, it has to be noticeable. So who do we assume it has to be noticeable for? The people in the mavoi. Because the whole issue is we don't want you leaving your alleyway and forgetting. The alleyway feels a little bit public because there's a lot of people in the alleyway because it opens up into a few courtyards, and in each courtyard there's a few houses. We're worried that you might think, oh, I can walk out into the public domain, so we need some sort of recognizable item there. However, we saw yesterday that maybe, or 2 days ago, that maybe the recognizable item, as long as it's recognizable to the public domain, from the public domain, maybe it's okay. That's our case of nir'emi bachutz. It's seen from the outside, but shavemi bifnim, but it's flush up against the wall of the alley. So you can't notice it from the inside. Maybe that's okay also, because maybe the issue is not only for the people in the mavoi, the alley, but maybe it's also for the people outside so that they don't see, oh, look, there's people carrying there and there's a lot of people there. Maybe we can carry here. So it's possible that it goes in both directions and therefore it might work, even if it doesn't necessarily have anything noticeable for the inside. Maybe it works also. Maybe it works because there's some sort of sign on the outside. Okay. And this could also mean that once there's a sign on the outside, maybe the people on the inside kind of know about it because it's already noticeable. Think about it. If it's noticeable on the outside, so you know when you're leaving, even though you don't see it, you know it's there. Maybe that also has something to do with it. So Rabba bar Rav Huna said this works. Rabba came along and said, what are you talking about? There's this Mishnah that we saw about the chatzir, the small courtyard that goes into the bigger courtyard. And what happened? We said the smaller courtyard can't carry because it's open and you don't have anything noticeable. Even though from the outside, the bigger courtyard does have noticeable boundaries. So that should seem to go against what Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said, and you can't really disagree with the Mishnah. So we gave one answer that builds on the other answer, which is Ravina and Rabbi Zera. I'm reminding you all this because we're going to reference them in another minute or two. So if you remember, we said that Rabbi Zera said it's nichnesin kotlei ktana l'gdola. The walls of the smaller courtyard jut out into the bigger courtyard. So the walls that demarcate the extended section of the bigger courtyard aren't noticeable when you're looking at the walls of the inner one, because the walls of the inner one jut all the way out into the other space. And then we don't say lavud, that maybe, if it's less than 3 tvachim from the sides, maybe we would just view it as if those walls are not really jutting out and they're just kind of stuck against, as if imaginarily they're part of the bigger walls of the bigger chatzer, in which case that answer wouldn't really work. They say, it must be a case where there's no lavud. And what do they say? Well, we saw that, and all this is going to be important for today, so I'm reminding you of all this. Rav Ada bar Avimi brought a braita about the Mishnah that explained the Mishnah that said, the Mishnah is in a case where the courtyard is 10, the smaller one, and the bigger one has, the opening is 10 amot, cubits, and the bigger one is 11, which means that how much space is on either side? 3 tvachim, just less than 3, which means you should be able to say lavud. So we saw Ravina said, well, it must be, it's off to the side a little. 2 on one side, 4 on the other. And it's like Rebbe who says you need on both sides for a courtyard. And therefore, we're not going to end up with a case where lavud will work. And therefore, the courtyard walls go into the bigger one. And that's why if it were really near Emi Bachutz, if it was seen from the outside and not from the inside, it really would work. But this isn't that case. That was all to explain Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. So now we're going to start from the second line and we're going to question this whole thing. And their assumption, they're starting from the main argument here. It's a structure called Iyamart Bishlama, which means if you say like this, it'll work. But if you say like that, it's not going to work. And it's not going to work because of the braita that Rav Ada bar Avimi brought. He brought a braita that said the small is opened by 10 and the bigger has an opening of 11. Now the whole question is, why did he have to specifically give those measurements? And we're basically going to say the fact that he specifically brought those measurements is only going to work with one opinion here, and not the one that near Emi Bachutz v'Shavemi Bifnim is a lechi. Okay, that's basically where we're going to go. So the main focus is going to be on that line, that braita. Hi, my, what are you trying to say? What you're saying doesn't really make sense, because they're now bringing the opinion that works. The opinion that's going to work with this 10, 11 measurement is going to be the opinion that if you can see it from the outside and not from the inside, it does not work. Why? And you'd have to say, we have to establish a few things first. Remember, we said already it was according to Rebbe, right? And who needs 2 pasim in order for it to work. You need 2 lechis in a courtyard. Okay, so now, it must be that Rebbe savala ki Rabbi Yossi. Now we're bringing in another machloket. There's a machloket, we talked before that a lechi doesn't need any minimum amount. A korah, a beam needs to be 1 tefach wide. A lechi doesn't. But in fact, it's not true. There's a machloket about it. And Rabbi Yossi says a lechi needs to be 3 tvachim, 3 handbreadths. So it must be, now think about this case, 10, right? Then it extends to 11. The wider one is 11, which means that when you're in your chatzer, the bigger courtyard, what do you end up with? You have 2 spaces of 3 tvachim on either side, right? You have that wall between the bigger courtyard extends out, right? You can see from the picture. Let's go back to our picture. If you look at picture number 69, okay, so here's picture 69. We have this little wall at the end where it comes out. So that's an amma altogether. 3 tvachim on this side, 3 on this. Okay, remember, we don't need the answer of Ravina that it was 2 and 4. We're going to just stick with the average case where we can assume if it's 1 amma, it's probably centered. So now, Rebbe must hold like Rabbi Yossi that in order for a lechi to work, now where is this lechi working? If you say it's not nidom mishum lechi near Ebi b'fnim b'shavemi b'chutz, the lechi is working for the big courtyard. Remember, the big courtyard you can carry in because it has walls on every side. Now, on that side where it borders with the smaller courtyard, there's only walls of 3 tvachim. So now he's going to say, Why did it need to be exactly an amma where it juts out more? Because 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and that's why the the bigger courtyard you can carry in, because it has walls on those sides of 3 tvachim, and Rebbe must hold like Rabbi Yossi, right? He needs 2, it's Rebbe, and he holds like Rabbi Yossi that each one has to be 3. And then you'd say, Udrabizeru, Udravina later. You don't need those things about the walls of the small one jutting out and all that, and that it's 2 on one side and 4 on the other, because the Chatzer Ktana is going to be forbidden no matter what, because you say, right, the wall, remember, there's no noticeable indicator in the small courtyard. And this is according to the opinion that your emi bachutz v'shavemi bifnim does not work. So therefore, you don't need any of those answers. And that all works. And therefore, mishum hachi, because of that, ktana be'eser u'gdola be'echatesre. Mishum direbi savala keRabbi Yossi. They just repeat what we said before, which is the reason why it was said that this is 10 and that's 11, the bigger one is 11, is because you need a minimum of 3 tvachim on each side in order to allow the outer courtyard. In the inner courtyard, for sure, you can't carry anyway because you can't see anything. So that all works very well. The problem is going to be that if you go the other direction, and then you'd have to say, going back to yesterday, which I just reviewed this morning, and then you need to say the inner courtyard walls jut out into it, and it's 2 tvachim on one side and 4 on the other, so that you don't have lavud on both sides, and it's Rebbe, but you'd have to say Rebbe lo savala keRabbi Yossi. But in this opinion, you'd have to say Rebbe doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Why not? Because remember, you're allowed to carry in the inner court, the bigger courtyard. If you can carry in the bigger courtyard, why is that? Well, at this point, you only have a wall of 2 tvachim on one side and 4 on the other. So the 4 tvachim wall would be good if you're Rabbi Yossi, but the 2 tvachim wall won't work. And remember, Rebbe needs in a chatzer 2 lechis. So you wouldn't be allowed to carry in the big chatzer if Rebbe held like Rabbi Yossi. So you'd have to say Rebbe doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi because there's only 2 on one side and 4 on the other. So the 2 is not going to work as a lechi. So therefore, it must be Rebbe doesn't hold. Now, if Rebbe doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, now we're going to get messed up with our measurements. Then you don't need it to be 6 tvachim, basically, right? 1 amma extra, because now we're going to say, why do you need the bigger one to be 11 specifically? We're now going to say it either should be less than or more than, but 11 is a very random number. 11 worked perfectly according to the first, but because that was your minimum, you need 3 and 3 to have a lechi to allow carrying in the inner courtyard, the bigger courtyard. But now we're going to say, either way you look at it, 11 doesn't make sense. If the whole thing was like we just said in the earlier case, in the first option, that it's to teach you how much you need there in order to allow carrying in the bigger courtyard, well, how much do you need? If we don't hold like Rabbi Yossi, all you need is, let's just assume, even though you need even less than a tefach, but let's just say a tefach. Okay, you need some sort of measurement. So let's just say a tefach, that's the smallest. So it should say, be'eser u'shnei tefachim sage. It should say, the small one is 10, and the bigger one is 10 and 2 tefachim. That would have been more appropriate because it's trying to teach you the minimum that will still work. So it shouldn't have said 11, which is 4 tvachim bigger than that. And if you want to say, it's to say, we don't care how big a lechi you have there and how wide it juts out from the small to the big. Since you can't see it from the small, it's not going to work anyway. So if you want to say it's very large, right, and we're still not going to allow the small one to carry, and this is, now remember, we're in the opinion of nir'emi bachutz v'shavemi bifnim, does work, right? It would theoretically work, but since the walls of the Ktana jut all the way out, you don't see the lechi, and it doesn't matter how big it is, it's not going to help, then it shouldn't have taken such a small measurement, shouldn't have said 1 amma, which is 3 on either side. It should have given you 15, let's say, right? That the small courtyard is 10, and the bigger one is 15, and it still doesn't work. In other words, that would have been a better way to say it. So if it's trying to say, to allow the larger courtyard, it should have given you a very small one. If it's trying to say, even then, the smaller courtyard is still forbidden, it would have given you a larger amount. So therefore, the 11, the 10, 11 specifically, doesn't make sense according to that opinion. Therefore, elalav shmamina niremi b'chutz v'shavemi b'fnim eino nidon mishum lechi shmamina. What they basically say is that Braita that says, that explains the mission that the small is 10 and the bigger is 11, only really works, that whole measuring system or the specific measurements they use really seem to make a lot more sense to the opinion that niremi b'chutz v'shavemi b'fnim doesn't work, okay? Isn't a lechi. So now we basically brought a Braita to say that opinion is difficult. However, we're now going to see something else about this. So now going back to Rabba bar Rav Huna. Again, Rabba bar Rav Huna is the son of Rav Huna. That's what it says about him. Rav Yosef was a student of Rav Huna. And Rav Yosef comes along and says, again, Rabba bar Rav Huna was the one who said it works, even though you can't see it inside. So, Amar Rav Yosef lo shmi'a li hashmatita. Even though I studied with Rav Huna, I never heard him say that. Which means Rabba must have said this on his own and not that he learned it from his father, right? There's always an assumption that probably they get their traditions from their parents, especially if their father's a rabbi. So, but here it seems like Rabba made this up on his own. Now we're going to see something that comes up a lot in the Gemara, which is Rav Yosef, when he got old, seemed to forget things. And Abai, his student, always reminds him of things. So even though Rav Yosef said, I never heard this from Rav Huna, we're now going to have Abai who says, not only did you learn it from Rav Huna, but I heard you say it. Okay, I know you did. And here he reminds him. And this goes on all over Shas, that Abai reminds Rav Yosef of all sorts of things he forgot. Amar le Abai, Amart ni'alan. You told me this explicitly. You told it to us. You taught us in the name of Rav Huna that nir'emi b'chutz v'shavemi b'fnim works according to Rav Huna. Where? Aha, Amart ni'alan, on the following statement. Okay, now we're going to have a bit of a build-up here. To Amar Rami bar Abba Amar Rav Huna, Rami bar Amma said in the name of Rav Huna, this is what Rav Yosef, you taught us in the Beit Midrash, Lechi hamoshech im dofno shamavoy pachot me'arba amot nidon mishum lechi. Okay, let's move to the picture. Okay, we're up to picture number 73. Okay, if you have the wall of the mavoy continues basically, you have a lechi that basically continues as if it's going out of the wall, out of the mavoy, out of the alley, and it juts out less than 4 amot. If it juts out less than 4 amot, nidon mishum lechi, this works. Okay, already you see, this is nir'emi b'chutz v'shavemi b'fnim. It's clearly seen from the outside because it juts out, so you'll notice it. But from the inside, it just continues the wall of the mavoy. There's nothing noticeable at all. Umishtamesh im chodo hapnimi. And what can you do? You can carry up until the inner line of the lechi, not the outer one. Okay, we learned this already about, is the space between the lechayim allowed or not? Daled amot, once it juts out already 4 cubits, nidon mishum mavoy v'asur lishtamesh bekulo. Then already this becomes its own mavoy, and you're not allowed to use it at all, okay? You can't, even the inner part isn't going to work. So now, at amart lanala, and you yourself said about this statement of Rami bar Abba in the name of Rav Huna. Now, first you taught us this statement, and then you said, Shma mina tzlat. We're going to learn 3 things from here. Number 1, Shma mina bein lechayayim asur. We're going to learn what we talked about previously, which is the space in between the lechi is forbidden. Only from where the lechi starts, it permits everything before, but not once the lechi starts. Ushma mina meshech mavoy ba'arba. These are all sides of machlokot, right? That this statement shows he took sides. That, number 1, doesn't work between l'chayim. We saw there was a machloket. Number 2, we saw that there was a debate about, is the minimum size of a mavoy 4 tfachim, 4 handbreadths, or 4 cubits. So he must hold it's 4 cubits because he uses the cubit measurement here to say once the lechi is 4 cubits, it already makes its own mavoy there. And then this doesn't work as a lechi. So then, right, it's obviously 4 cubits and not 4 handbreadths. Ushmamina, and the third thing is our issue. Nir'emi b'chutz v'shavemi b'fnim nidon mishum lechi, because as long as the lechi is less than 4 amot, it works. So there you have it. So not only, right, you taught it to us in the name of Rav Huna, and you said explicitly this is what comes out of his statement. Now the Gemara tells us what's the halacha in this area, right? We don't always get that in, right? You always want to know what's the halacha. The Gemara doesn't often tell you, but sometimes we have it. In fact, sometimes these are later additions to the Gemara. There were people called Sforaim after the time of the Amoraim who added notes into the Gemara. Often the Hilchatas are their additions. And that kind of got put into our text. So hilchata nir'eh mibachutz v'shaveh mibifnim nidon mishum lechi. So the halacha is, in fact, it does work. Shocking, right? They actually paskin that this works against what you would have thought intuitively. So now the Gemara says, tiyuvta v'hilchata? What do you mean? Didn't we start off today with a problem from the Braita on that opinion? We said that whole Braita that said that the Mishnah about the Chatzar was 10 and 11 doesn't fit. So how could we have a contradiction from a Braita and yet say we hold that way? So they say, no, we have no problem. Mishum detane Rabbi Chia kavate. Another thing from yesterday, if you remember, we said that there was a machloka between Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon Berebi. Does this work? Does it not work? And then we said it must be Rabbi Chia is the one who says it works, because Rabbi Chia brings the following Braita. Kotel shetzido achad kanus mechavero. If the wall juts in at some point, whether it's it doesn't matter if it's noticeable only to the inside or only to the outside. If there's kind of this niche in the wall that's noticeable to one of the sides, it works. So what do you see? It's true. This Braita that we saw earlier today with the 10 and 11 doesn't work, but there's a different Braita that does work. So again, as long as we have some Tannaitic source that supports it, we can say that that's valid. Okay, and therefore they conclude that this actually does work. Now, we're finally back to our original Mishnah. Okay, who can remember the original Mishnah? We're still in the first Mishnah of Masechet Eruvin. Okay, by the way, this is incredibly common, that the first Mishnah of a Masechet, they deal with for many dapim. Okay, the first Mishnah gets the most dealing with for a few reasons. One is because many times the beginning, I said that there's Sforaim. A lot of times the beginning of Masechtot are Sforaitic, and there's all sorts of additions that the Sforaim added. Very common in the beginning of Masechtot for this to happen. And the second thing I think it really is they want to introduce all sorts of new concepts that you don't know yet. So we're getting a lot of introductions to all sorts of topics. So now we want to deal with this issue. We talked about the Mavoy that was Lamala Me'asrim. You have to lower it, right? You have to put the beam lower. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need to. Then it says if it's wider than 10 amot, you have to make it narrower, right? You have to make it smaller. And then Rabbi Yehuda didn't disagree, if you remember. So the first thing is going to be Rabbi Yehuda. Does he disagree about this or not? Didn't say so in the Mishnah, but Abai is going to bring a Braita where it says he disagrees also. Amar Abai, Tana. Here we have a Braita. V'harachav me'eser gima'et. Okay, if it's wider than 10, that's our Mishnah. You have to make it narrower. Rabbi Yehuda omer enot tzarich lema'et. You don't need to. So the first question is going to be, if Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need it, well then, how wide is it okay for Rabbi Yehuda? Does he have a certain limit, right? It's not 10, but how wide can it go? So we're going to try to figure it out from somewhere else. Ba'ad kama. So, Savar Rav Achi Kameder Rav Yosef Lemeimer. Savar Lemeimer always means he thought to say, but it was rejected. So he thought to say in front of Rav Yosef, Ad 13 amah v'shlish, 13 and a half amah. That seems like a pretty random number, but we're going to see where he gets this from. Kal v'chomer mipasei biraot. Okay, if you have your picture book, you see this kind of funny picture of a well. Okay, we're picture number 74. There's a well in the middle here, and there's all these cows. Okay, so now what's the issue? You have all these wells in the public domain, and people are coming on Aliyah LaRegel. They're coming to the Beit HaMikdash to bring their sacrifices, and they all have to travel a far distance, and they're going to need water on the way. They can't carry all their water with them. So how are they going to drink on Shabbat? Because what's the problem? The wells are in public domain, and not only them, but how are their animals going to be able to drink? So we basically do what's called pasei biraot. We can make these little L-shaped things for the corners, put up on 4 corners these little L-shaped pasim, they're right, little posts. Some people say that you need 8. You need also in the center, in between each one. But this opinion is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that you only need 4 on the edges. And then the question is, and what does it do? It basically creates like a private domain around, remember the bore or the be'er, the well, or a pit with water, whatever it is 10 tfachim deep, 4 by 4 wide, which means it's its own private domain. So you now have a private domain in the public domain. What are we worried about? If we allow you to drink, if you drink over it, no problem. But if you stick your jug in, fill it up, and then take it right outside the well, you're going to be in the public domain. You're moving from public to private. So what did they do? They said if you put these 4 little things on the side, they create imaginary mechitzas, even though they're very wide open, and that's what we're going to talk about here. They create these imaginary mechitzas, and you're allowed to carry within that space. And then you can feed your animals, you can have them drink, you can drink, no problem. How wide? Well, they said 13.5 amma. We'll get to it more and we can get to it on Daf Yud Zayin, but it's to allow, there's a question of how many animals it has to allow to bring in, but it's basically to allow space for animals to come in to drink. And that's why you can have a space of 13.3 amma in between each of these posts. So now what does he say? He makes a kal v'chomer from pasei biraot. Uma pasei biraot shehi tarta behem parutz meruba ala omer. Now this is a musag we're going to talk about for the rest of today, which is if you have, we're going to talk about it in both directions. Parutz meruba ala omer or omer meruba ala parutz. If you have, it's more open than solid, right? In these pasei biraot, it's much more open than it is actually walls, right? There's more open space than wall. And yet, right, we allow that, which means this is a huge leniency here. It's a lenient case. So if we allow parutz meruba ala omer, and yet lo itarta behem yoter mishlosh amma b'shlish, and yet it was limited to 13.3, then mavoi shelo itarta bo parutz meruba ala omer. What did we talk about? The walls of the mavoi. You can't have less wall than standing. Right there, we don't allow this kind of thing. It has to be, you have these walls on the sides, right? If the walls are way more open than they are not, then it's going to be a problem. So there, we weren't so lenient. So it's more chamor. So wouldn't we allow then? No more than 13.3. So it must be Rabbi Yehuda limits it to 13.3. Right? The 13.3, where are we getting these numbers? I said we'll get to that on Daf Yud Zayin when we talk about this case per se, because otherwise we'll never get through the daf. So hold off on that, but just take it as given right now. So now they say, so you get it, pasei biraot are very lenient, and yet it's limited to 13.3. So certainly here, Rabbi Yehuda is not going to say we could do more than 13.3, because here we're much more strict about it. We don't allow such breaches in the wall. But now they say no. Remember, it started with savar. He thought to say. But now they say v'hi anotenet. No, this all the more so proves it. Pasei biraot she tarta behem parutz meruba ala omer lo tatir behem yoter mishlosh amma b'shlish. When we're lenient, we allow one leniency, but we don't allow another leniency. So we're lenient in this case that we allow it to be so open in pasei biraot, but we're going to limit it to 13.3. But mavoi shelo itarta bo parutz meruba ala omer tatir bo yoter miyugimel amma b'shlish. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda would say here, since most of the wall is standing, we can allow a bigger space. Okay, so basically it's the opposite logic. This is like taking the logic and flipping it, right? If it's lenient, we say, well, then it's more stringent, we should allow. No less than this. But now we say, no. Maybe when you're lenient, you have to be more strict about something else. Whereas here we're strict about something else, we can be more lenient about the space. Or maybe you could say the exact opposite. When we're already lenient with one thing, we can be lenient with something else and say, maybe 13.3 is actually a leniency. Mavoi, klal lo. Maybe mavoi, it's true, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say 10, but maybe he says 11 or something. Maybe he doesn't go so far as to say 13.3. Maybe 13.3 is a lot, and he doesn't even allow that much. Okay, so all these are options. We don't really have an answer. Tane Levi. Now we're going to talk about how do you fix a mavoi. We're back to the regular opinion. Has to be 10. If it's more than 10, you have to lima'et. How do you do that? So we're now going to say, Tane Levi brings a bright time. Mavoi shehu rachav esrim amma. Let's say it's 20 wide. So what do? No etz kaneh be'emtzaito v'dayo. Picture number 75. You put a little pole up right in the center, one little pole. That's it. You're now split it into 10 and 10. No problem. You can now put your lechi and you're good. So then, who tanela? So Levi brought this braita, but who amala? But then he himself said, "De'ein alacha kota mishnah." But this is not sufficient. We don't hold by this braita. Ikadamre. Some people say that it wasn't Levi himself who rejects the mishnah, but the braita, but Amar Shmuel mishmei de Levi, and he didn't say it explicitly. Shmuel said it in his name. Ein halacha kota mishnah. We don't hold this way. Either which way, Levi didn't hold this way. It's just a matter. Did Shmuel say it in his name, or did he say it directly? So what do you do then, according to this? Amar Shmuel mishmei de Levi. So again, Shmuel says in the name of Levi. Next picture. Okay, turn to picture number 76. עושה פס גבוה 10 במשך 4 אמות, ומעמידו לאורכו של המבוי. You build a little wall that's 10 tefachim tall. Here they kind of put each tefach in a different color to show it's 10 tefachim tall. And it goes, right, it has to be arba amot. Here you see, arba, 4 cubits is the size kind of for a new mavoi, not 4 tefachim, right? Again, siding on one side of that machloket. And you put it parallel to the walls of the mavoi, right, to the side walls. And it basically goes into your mavoi. And then that is a serious separation because you have it going for 4 cubits and it's 10 tefachim high, and that basically separates it into 2. One little pole is not going to do it. It needs kind of a wall like this. Inami. Alternatively, you could say Keder Rav Yehuda. Like Rav Yehuda, Da'ama Rav Yehuda, there's 2 ways to do it. One is to put it going into the mavoi, and one is to have it flush on the opening of the mavoi, and you could do it like Rav Yehuda says. He talked specifically about a case of 15. Rashi will explain what he would say about 20. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. There's also 2 pictures for that in the book. Da'amar Rav Yehuda mavoi shu rachav 15 ama. Let's say it's 15 wide. Marchik 2 amot. You move 2 away from the wall. V'oseh pas 3 amot. Okay, you start 2 away from the wall. You leave 2 empty, 2 cubits. And then you put a wall of 3 cubits. And this goes back to what we talked about before. Before we talked about it can't be parutz merubah ala omed, but it can be omed merubah ala parutz. In this case, you have 3 of a wall standing, 2, which is up against the wall, right? You basically have, okay, and I put this on the sheet. I decided to come up with the way to do it. I highlighted the parts where there's a pas, and I didn't highlight where I just did numbers. I did 10, 3, 2, right? So 3 is highlighted. That's where you have something. You have a 10 opening, right? First you have 15 opening. Now you have 10. Then you have a wall that you put that goes 3 amot across, 3 cubits. And then you leave 2 open. So this is what we call omed merubah ala parutz. The part of the side there, the 5 on the side. 3 has a standing wall. 2 does not have a standing wall. That overrides that. We end up basically with such a small opening, right? And the opening is less than the closure, and therefore it would work. Okay, this is picture number 77. Okay, so instead of this wall going into the mavoi like the first one, this wall is standing on, right? It's basically creating a wall on the entrance. And that whole entrance space to the mavoi, it's like a long lechi, okay? It doesn't function as a lechi, right? That just functions to block off your space. And then you put a lechi or a beam on the 10 part. So that works. Now, so if you look at the next 2 pictures, that's based on Rashi, as what you would do with 20. So either you could do 3, you basically create your 10 amma space is going to be in the center, and each side you have a 3 amma pas, right, a 3 amma lechi like that, and 2 on the sides. That's one option. Or you could do 6 and 4, okay? 6, then, right, you would put the 10 would be on the side, on one side. The other side would have a 6 cubit long wall, and then 4 cubits open, and that would also work. Okay, that's what Rashi says. You would take Rav Yehuda and apply that to 20. That's what you would do. Now the Gemara is going to make all sorts of assumptions about how omed parutz, how it works, omed merubah ala parutz, when you have sections and stuff, and we'll see. From the fact that he gave this example of 3 and 2, and he didn't bring, this is like a math, when you're learning basic math in the beginning, how many ways can you get to 5, right? And how many ways can you get to 5 where the standing part is more than the non-standing part? And the fact that they didn't use all these other options is going to prove to us that those options wouldn't work, each for their own reason, and then they'll have to assess whether that's really true or not. That's going to be the structure for the next little while. So now they say, Amai, why do you do it this way? Why don't you do, Ya'aseh pas amav ha'mechzeh, v'yarchik shte amot, v'ya'aseh pas amav ha'mechzeh. Have it, okay, and this I put on the sheet, right? You have your 10 opening, then 1.5 standing, 2 open, 1.5 standing. That's a good way, right? 3 is 1.5 plus 1.5. Split it into 2. Instead of having one beam that's 3, you could have one beam that's 1.5, another one that's 1.5. In the end, you still have more standing than not. And why didn't they say that? Must be because what's the weakness in this? You can't take 2 different beams, right? What's the problem here? The 2 that's open is more than each one of those beams. Each one of those beams is 1.5. You can't use 2 beams to override 1. When you say Omei Merubah ala Parutz, it has to be 1 is bigger than the other. It can't be the 2 together override that. Okay, so that's why they didn't do 1.5 and 1.5 and the 2 open. So then they say, no, lo, you could say, have omed, lo have, lo olam. They say, no, lo olam emelcha have omed. You could say this does work. But why didn't it work here? Because there's something different here. If it were just 1.5 to 1.5, that would be fine. But here you're forgetting about there's 10 open on the other side. So shanehacha dahave daate avira dahaigisa ve'avira dahaigisa umevatele. These 1.5s, one of them is up against a wall, but the other one is surrounded by open of 10 amot. So you have the 2 amma in the middle and the 10 amot over there. That's for sure not going to work. But if it were just 1.5 to 1.5, then you could call this omei merubah parutz. So the Gemara is rejecting to say it never works. It's just saying that in this case, because it's open on the other side, it doesn't work. Next question. So we're going to have 3 alternative suggestions, and from each one, we're going to try to infer something about how this, it's very interesting because what they're trying to get at is, how does omei merubah parutz work? Does it work always? Can you put 2 against 1? Or does it have to be each one independently can override the other? What if they're equal? We're going to get into all these possibilities. Okay, so now the next suggestion. Yaseh pas ama v'yarchik ama v'yaseh pas ama v'yarchik ama v'yaseh pas ama. Another way to get to 5 is to have each one 1, 3 standing, right? 3 each of an amma standing, and 2 in between not standing. Okay, now in this case, it's already not that the middle one is bigger than each of the side ones. They're equal. So shema mina, the fact that they didn't suggest this comes to imply omei kiparutz asur. Okay, it must mean if they're equal, that doesn't work either. So again, they reject and say, lo olam e'melacha mutal. You could say it does work. V'shanehacha da'ata avira dahaigisa u'dahaigisa u'mevatale. Again, what's the problem? You have 10 open on the other side. So because we have so many openings here, that's why it doesn't work. But really, if it were 1 closed, 1 open, 1 closed, 1 open, 1 closed, 3 is more than the 2. Even though they're all equal, it would work. Okay. Third suggestion. V'yarchik ama, go away from the wall 1 amma. Yaseh pas ama v'mechze, then do 1.5. Then yarchik ama, skip another amma of space. V'yaseh pas ama v'mechze. Another way to do it. Okay, where you have, now what's the advantage of this? So now you have your 1.5 is greater than your 1, right? And each one is greater than the other one, and you have a wall on one side. You don't have as many openings as in the first case. So, and you don't have, right, the first case had 1.5, 1.5 with 2. In this case, you have 1.5, 1.5 against 1. So the openings are only 1, and the big ones are 1.5. So that should for sure work because that's omei merubah parutz, even in an individual way, right? Each 1.5 is bigger than each one. So that should work. So why don't they say that one? So the Gemara says, in achinami, that one really should work. Why didn't they suggest that? It's a pain in the neck to build it that way. So they didn't suggest it because it's much easier to just put up a 3 than to start doing, okay, distance 1, 1.5, but right, it's much more complicated. But now there's another problem with this, okay? Going back to the beginning, forget about all our alternative options. Go back to the original, 3 and leave a space of 2. Why aren't we worried? You now have a 10 amma opening. You also have a 2 cubit opening. Why aren't we worried? People are going to walk in through the 2 cubit opening. Because at this point, what do we say the halacha is? The 2 cubit opening is viewed as if it's closed. You don't need a lechi there. You just need a lechi on the 10 cubit opening. So now the issue is, why don't we just say that people might walk, why aren't we worried? People might walk through that 2 amma opening. So, Amar Avad Parmana, we talked about this earlier also in the Masechet. Chazaka ein adam miniach petach gadol v'nichnas b'petach katan. We assume that if there's a big opening and a small opening, people will use the bigger opening. They're not going to squeeze through a tight entranceway if they have a way to go around. Umay shnami de Rabbi Ami u de Rabbi Asi. So now they say, well, what about Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi? There, if you remember, back on Daf Hey, what did they say? If there's an opening in the side of the wall, remember if they said, if you have an opening in the side wall, as long as you have a 4 tefachim wall in the front, and then there's a breach in the back, if it's less than 10 amma, it's fine. But if there's no wall in the front, then already 3 tvachim wide is going to be a problem, right? Less than 3 would be lavud. We view as if it's attached to the wall. But if it's less than 3 tvachim of open, if it is more than 3 tvachim of opening right up against the mavoi wall, that's not going to work. People will enter through there. So you are worried that people will enter through a small opening. So what do we say? Oh no, that's different because that's on the side wall. Remember? Ha kamimayit bihilucha, ha lo kamimayit bihilucha. There, it's a much better shortcut to go through the side wall rather than go all around the block and go through the other wall. But when it's on the same wall and it's just 3 cubits to the side, you'll just go around into the bigger one. It's just a matter of how lazy people are, right? You'd rather take the shortcut if it's right, but if you're not going to be so lazy if it's right in front of you and you could just walk a teeny drop more. Okay, now we're continuing on this idea of amum merubah ala parutz and in a different application of it. And again, they're going to get to the same mathematics kind of game that we played before. Tanan hatam. There's a Mishnah, and in fact, if you look in the Masoret HaShas, which tells you where you can find it in the Mishnah, which I looked at, it says, oh, by the way, this isn't really in the Mishnah, and it must be a mistake that it says it's in the Mishnah. Tanan means we learned it in the Mishnah. It must be just a bright. Or ha'asla. Asla with an ayin, even though asla is really, it's a toilet, and it's a toilet cover, and it's really with an aleph. So, or ha'asla v'chalal shalom mitztarfim b'tefach. Okay, this is laws of oel, tumat oel, you need a tefach. We're now going to measure if we have a toilet seat cover. We talked about this before. They had these leather toilet seat covers that they would put basically over a hole, and you would sit on it. So they would take that toilet seat cover. It has a hole in it. Now, when you measure, is this all a tefach? You measure it based on not only the size of where the leather is, but you include the hole in your calculation. Now, why would this be? Again, it would be omeid merubah ala parutz. You view this as a toilet cover, and you measure from side to side, and the fact that the inside is bigger, has a hole, doesn't matter because the standing part of it or the existing part of it is more than the hole. So it's the same idea. My or hasla. So first they ask, what is this? Amar Rav Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, or kisoy shel beit hakisei. It's the cover for the toilet. Vikama. Now, how big is this? So now we're going to learn that there was a debate, or maybe it's not a debate, about how many fingers go into a tefach. So there's one opinion says 4, one opinion says 6 in this. Okay, we're going to see. Right, you would think 5 because fist 5, but okay, we'll see 4 and 6, and then they talk about thicker fingers, thinner fingers. Maybe it's really all the same. But what's the makeup of these etzbaot? Okay, so ki'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, these are again the nechuti we talked about yesterday. Rav Dimi and Ravin they both came, when they came from Eretz Yisrael, they told us in Bavel, Amar etzba'ayim mikan, that means 2 fingers on one side, etzba'ayim mikan, 2 on the other, that's of existing, ve'etzba'ayim revach ba'emtza, and 2 in the middle of space. Okay, that the empty hole in the middle takes up 2 fingers worth of space, 2 fingers worth. Ki'ata Ravin, when Ravin came, he said something different. Etzba v'mechza mikan, ve'etzba v'mechza mikan, ve'etzba revach ba'emtza. 1.5, 1.5, and 1 in the middle. Now, notice there's 2 differences between them. One is, right, the first is 6 fingers. The second is 4 fingers. But the first they're all equal. Even the hole is equal to each side by itself. The second one has that the hole is smaller because 1.5, 1.5, and 1 in the middle. So the hole has to be smaller. So we're going to see that maybe that's a debate between them. So Amalei Abai Rav Dimi, mi pagitu. Are you really disagreeing with him? Amalei Rav Dimi says, lo, no, he said 4, I said 6, but really I'm talking about small fingers and he's talking about big fingers. So really we say the same thing. But then Abai velo pagin, and we really don't debate. But comes Abai and he says, Amalei, lie, of course you debate. Pagitu, I swear. Pagitu, you do disagree. What do you disagree about? The other issue. Maybe not how many fingers, but you disagree with how Omei Merubah ala parutz works. But Omei Merubah ala parutz mishtei ruchot pagitu, right? When you have 2 overriding 1. Ledidach, according to you, have Omei mishtei ruchot. You think that 2 can override 1, even if each one individually can't override, right? 2 is equal to 2. So 2 can't override 2, but 2 plus 2 can override 2. You think that works. But he doesn't think so because the Isal Kadatach lo pagitu. If you think you don't disagree, he should have said what? If you want to split 4 into 3 equal parts, what would you do? Etzba v'shlish mikan, etzba v'shlish mikan, etzba v'shlish revach be'emtza. Not exactly equal, but close to, right? Gets you close to 4, 3.9. Again, this is further proof they weren't really exacting with their mathematics. So basically saying you could have said actually it would work because it's 1.333 and then, right, actually it would. So anyway, you could split it into 3 equal parts, and the fact that he doesn't, and he says it's 1.5, 1.5, and 1, must be because he doesn't think that if they're equal, it would work. So then comes Rav Dimi and he says, what are you talking about? Elamai paginan? You really think I disagree with this? Liditi hachi bailim lemar. If you really think I disagree, and I want to say that as long as the 2 override the 1, it doesn't matter if it's the same size or the middle one is bigger, then I would have brought a bigger chidush. What case should I have brought? Hachi by lididi, according to me, hachi bailim lemar. I should have brought the bigger chidush. Etzbo shnei shlishim mikan, 1 2/3 on one side. Be'etzbo shnei shlishim mikan, 1 2/3 on the other. Be'etzba'ayim shnei shlishim rabach be'emtza. I should have brought a case where the middle is bigger than each of the sides, and yet we still say since the 2 sides together are more than the middle, it would override it. So if that's really what I thought, that's what I should have said. So it's funny that Abai is saying this is what you're saying when Rav Dimi is there to say that's not really what I meant. If I wanted to say that, that's what I would have said. And he said, but I will credit you this. If you want to say we disagree, I'll give you one thing that we must disagree about. We do disagree about if they're equal. In other words, I think 2, 2, and 2 can override the 2, and the 2 on the side can override the 2 because they're equal. But if they're more, right, if the middle is more than either of the 2 sides, then it won't work. Okay, so that's what he's saying basically. We don't disagree about as long as, right, first of all, I said, as long as you have more and the 2 sides together, it should override the middle no matter what. Comes and he says, no, I don't think that. I only think when they're equal that the 2 can then override. So 2, 2, and 2. Because if I meant more, I would have said 2 2/3 in the middle over 1 1/3. And Ravin seems to not agree with that because you're right. He should have said 1 1/3, 1 1/3, 1 1/3. So I agree that when it comes to parutz ki-omed or omed ki-parutz, where they're equal, right? As long as if they're equal, I do think they can override. And he obviously doesn't think so. And that's why Ravin gave the example of each of the 2 sides are bigger than the middle. Okay, so on that issue, we disagree. And there we have, again, more discussion about how this could work or how it couldn't work. In the beginning, we really had a lot of suggestions that we weren't really clear what the conclusion was, because we kind of said it could be explained in either which way. Whereas here, it seems very clear that at least what's clear is there's a machloket about it. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Pick up from here tomorrow. Have a good day.